Okay, before I start, I need you to do something for me. If you're listening to this while scrolling or while doing something else, just pause for a second and really listen. Because what happened to me that night was not supposed to happen. Not at a normal dinner, not with friends, not after 8 ordinary years of marriage. And the strange part is, it started with a joke. A stupid little joke that I thought would make everyone laugh. Instead, it opened something I didn't even realize had been quietly sitting between my husband and me for years. And what he said after that joke right there at the dinner table, in front of everyone, changed the way I see my marriage forever. One of our friends had to walk outside to breathe. Another started crying without even trying to hide it. And me, I sat there frozen in my chair, realizing that the man I had been living with for 8 years had just revealed something about our story that I had somehow never truly understood. But before I tell you what he said, you need to understand the kind of night it was, because everything about that evening felt normal, comfortable, easy. The kind of night where nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. It was a Friday in late September. If you've ever spent a summer in Texas, you know how brutal it can be. Weeks and weeks of heat that makes the air feel heavy and slow, like the entire state is holding its breath. But late September is when that grip finally loosens. That night the air outside felt cool for the first time in months. Not cold, just soft and easy, like the whole world had exhaled. We live just outside Austin, my husband Ethan and I. It's a small house we bought together 6 years ago when we were still young enough to believe a fixer-upper sounded romantic. You know the idea. We pictured ourselves happily painting walls together, laughing while building furniture, maybe drinking wine on the porch while admiring all the progress we made. The reality, of course, turned out to be a lot more like arguing about plumbing and spending entire Saturdays covered in dust while wondering why we didn't just buy something already finished. But still, it became our home. By the time this dinner happened, Ethan and I had been married for 8 years. 8 years is a funny amount of time. It's long enough to know someone deeply, but also long enough for life to quietly become routine. Now let me be very clear about something. We were not in trouble. We weren't fighting. There wasn't some secret crisis hiding under the surface of our marriage. No big betrayal, no dramatic tension, nothing like that. In fact, if you had asked me the week before that dinner how my marriage was going, I would have said something like, "Honestly, it's good," and I would have meant it. But the truth is, there's a difference between good and awake. What Ethan and I had slowly become over those 8 years was comfortable, very comfortable. The kind of comfortable where you stop noticing things. The way you stop noticing the view outside your window if you've lived in the same house long enough. You still love it, you just stop looking. And I didn't realize that was happening until the moment everything cracked open. That Friday night I had decided to cook a real dinner, not the usual quick weekday food, a proper dinner. I made my grandmother's brisket recipe, the one that takes almost the entire afternoon to cook slowly in the oven, roasted vegetables with garlic and butter, and homemade jalapeno cornbread. The real kind, not the boxed mix. I even pulled out the nice dishes, you know the ones. The plates that sit in the back of the cabinet because you keep telling yourself you'll use them for a special occasion. As if one day a letter will arrive in the mail saying, "Congratulations. Today officially qualifies." So I decided, why not tonight? I wore an actual dress instead of sweatpants. I curled my hair. For the first time in a long while, I felt like myself again. Ethan had invited two couples over. His best friend Logan from college and Logan's wife Cassidy, and our neighbors Bryce and Simone, 6 of us around the table, 2 bottles of good Texas red wine. Candles lit, music playing softly from the kitchen speaker, the kind of evening that wraps around you like a blanket, and everything was going perfectly. People were laughing. The food was disappearing fast. Every few minutes someone would say something like, "Okay, seriously, this brisket is incredible," which, if you've ever spent hours cooking for guests, you know is the best sound in the world. I remember sitting there at the table looking around and feeling something I hadn't felt in a while. Present, not rushing through the night, not thinking about tomorrow. Just sitting there inside the moment. And then Bryce lifted his wine glass and pointed it toward Ethan. "Man," he said, "I gotta say it, your wife put this whole thing together and it's amazing." "You are a lucky guy." Everyone laughed and nodded. Ethan looked at me from across the table, and he had this soft little smile on his face, the kind he gets when he's quietly proud of something. He lifted his glass slightly and said, "Every single day, brother." It was sweet, simple, just one of those nice little moments couples have in front of friends. And maybe it was the wine, or the warmth of the room, or the way everyone was laughing and relaxed, but something about that moment made me feel bold, playful, like I could say anything and the whole table would love it. You know that feeling when you suddenly feel like you're the funniest person in the room? That was the trap. I leaned forward slightly and looked around the table. Okay, I said with a grin. Can I be completely honest for a second? Immediately everyone leaned in because they could hear the trouble coming, and I started telling a story. When Ethan and I first started dating, I said, my best friend sat me down at a Whataburger at midnight and gave me a very serious talk. Logan was already laughing. Cassidy covered her mouth, waiting for the punchline. I continued. She looked at me and said, Lauren, I need you to really think about this. People were smiling now. I could feel the room leaning into the story. Because this is the same man, I said, pointing at Ethan, who once got lost driving to a Walmart he had been to at least 17 times. The table exploded. Logan slapped the table, laughing. Cassidy leaned back in her chair. Simone grabbed Bryce's arm, and I kept going, riding that wave of laughter. This is also the man, I continued, who does laundry like it's some kind of scientific experiment. More laughter. I have never once seen him separate colors, not one time. Whites, darks, towels, sweaters, everything goes into the machine together like a fabric survival challenge. By this point, everyone was dying laughing. Even Ethan smiled a little. And that's where I should have stopped. That would have been the perfect moment to end the joke, but instead, I took it one step further, the step that changed the entire night. I looked directly at Ethan across the table with a big dramatic grin. Then I raised my wine glass and said, honestly, the real reason I married this man, I paused just long enough for everyone to lean forward, is because I had already invested so much time dating him that I figured I might as well stick around and see how the story ended. The table detonated. Logan nearly fell out of his chair laughing. Cassidy shouted, oh my God. Bryce was wiping tears from his eyes. I leaned back in my chair slowly, feeling like I had completely won the moment. Like I had just delivered the funniest line of the night, and then I looked at Ethan, and the laughter caught in my throat because he wasn't laughing, not even a little. But he didn't look angry either. He wasn't doing that tight fake smile people do when a joke actually stings. He was just sitting there very still, both hands resting flat on the table, looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, and in that moment, the room started to go quiet. One by one, people noticed it too, the shift, the sudden stillness in the air. Logan slowly stopped laughing. Simone set her fork down gently. Cassidy looked from Ethan to me and back again, and Ethan looked around the table calmly. Then he said something none of us were expecting. Can I say something? And just like that, the entire room fell silent. Not a single person spoke, not a single glass moved. And that's when Ethan began telling a story I had never heard before. A story about the year before he met me. A year that almost convinced him love wasn't meant for him at all. And what he said next changed everything. The room was completely silent. Not the casual quiet of people waiting for someone to finish talking, but the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is paying attention. Ethan looked around the table slowly. At Logan. At Cassidy, at Bryce and Simone, and then finally back at me. His voice when he spoke was calm, almost too calm. Before I met Lauren, he said, there was a year of my life that I don't really talk about. No one moved. He rested his hands together on the table and continued. I'm not going to go into every detail tonight, he said, because that's a long story. But what I will tell you is that it was the year I became completely convinced that I was the kind of person people eventually leave. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Cassidy slowly pressed her fingers against her lips. Bryce stared down at the candle in the center of the table like he suddenly forgot what he was supposed to be doing. Ethan kept speaking in that same steady voice. You know how sometimes nobody actually says something out loud to you, but life just keeps showing you the same pattern over and over until you start believing it? He paused. Relationships ended. Friends drifted away, plans fell apart, people moved on. He shrugged slightly, and after a while I stopped trying to figure out why. Logan shifted in his chair but didn't interrupt. Ethan continued. I wasn't depressed the way people usually picture depression, he said. I still went to work every day, I still showed up to things. I laughed when people told jokes. He gave a small breath through his nose, but inside I had quietly accepted something. He looked down at his hands. I had accepted that the kind of love people talk about, the kind that stays, probably just wasn't going to be part of my life. The room was so still I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. No one was touching their food anymore, and I sat there staring at my husband, realizing I had never heard him talk like this before, not once in 8 years. Ethan lifted his eyes again. And then one Tuesday morning, he said, I walked into a coffee shop on South Congress. Now Logan slowly leaned back in his chair. Everyone at the table knew that coffee shop. It's one of those places in Austin that's always busy, always loud, Ethan continued. I was standing in line behind a woman who was having a very serious conversation with the barista. His mouth twitched slightly. Actually, I think conversation is being generous. A tiny ripple of nervous laughter moved around the table.